All right, so let me share my screen. What I would love to encourage folks is please post in the Q&A or chat, whatever's easiest for you. Typically, we love to have these sessions be very interactive. We've got a lot of folks on the line today, so we won't be able to field questions in real time, but we want to make sure that you get an opportunity to ask questions, kick the tires. This is, hopefully the first of a series of webinars we're going to be hosting around our GenAI readiness operating system. So, if you want to talk about, a more meaningful business topic these days, I'm not sure what it would be. Adopting and scaling GenAI is definitely the number one business priority in the world today. And Gartner just released some data in the last couple of weeks that they're projecting AI spending to hit $2.5 trillion globally this year. It's about a 40% year over year increase. And it's interesting, some of it is infrastructure, kind of foundational OpenAI, Google, Microsoft spend, but more and more we're seeing significant budget investments on the business side and a significant year over year commitment to scaling these capabilities. So the reason for all this investment and the reason for all the excitement is pretty clear. Gen AI is an unbelievable, almost kind of generational opportunity to help organizations accelerate growth, either through productizing premium solutions with Gen AI capabilities that they can monetize, or to deliver really amazing customer experiences. I think we're just on the cusp of seeing the full potential in that space. Three, it really enables you to deliver increased operating margins as you look at things like level one technical support and call centers where interactions are pretty routine. There's an opportunity to deliver high quality experiences with automation and reallocate those resources and your team members to higher quality, higher value added activities. And the last one is Gen AI is an unbelievable workforce productivity enabler. And again, we're just starting to see the implications of that. But I can tell you this, as an AI first organization, we literally move, 10, 15, 20 times faster than we were a year ago. As we embrace Gen AI, as we started looking at agents, as you really solve for your data challenges, it's unbelievable the productivity that this stuff enables. So bottom line is, this is Gen AI isn't hype. This is how the next decade of growth is likely going to be driven. And 2026 is going to be the year where this moves from kind of interesting, intriguing POC to real production solutions that start moving the business bottom line. The only challenge is, unfortunately, expectations have kind of lagged results up to date and up to this point. So last year, MIT released a really well-known study at this point that's kind of referenced quite a lot that almost 95% or approximately 95% of organizations have yet to see real bottom line impact from their Gen AI investments. BCG noted that only about a quarter of organizations have moved beyond POC, in their production environment. We're working with a bunch of companies that have, but the reality is most companies are still pretty early stages. And McKinsey also validated that most organizations are yet to see real bottom line EBITDA impact from their Gen AI efforts. So the real question, as you look at where we are in crossing the chasm and the pit of despair around Gen AI adoption, is why are companies struggling to realize Gen AI's promised benefits? All right, benefits are clear, everyone gets it. A little bit challenging to get there, and the reality is there's no easy button. And the reason for that is really the readiness gap. Right, so in order to adopt and successfully scale Gen AI, there are a lot of kind of foundational capabilities needed in the space of data. Data is the number one challenge. Talent, like this is a different kind of skill set, capability set. And so your engineers really need to be actively enabled, and it's a fairly steep learning curve on the front end. There's the topic of enterprise orchestration as we start to connect our data and enable knowledge assistance and generative solutions. They need to be able to navigate the different resources in your organization in real time. And if you've tried to do it yourself, just try to understand where the different information is needed to, kind of pull things together to deliver a customer request. You realize it's actually pretty complicated in most organizations. So we're having to kind of codify where stuff is, what the golden source, kind of data set is, put really good business logic around it that then drives enterprise orchestration. Most importantly, you've got to do this securely and responsibly. So we often say, like, the first rule of AI is first, do no harm. And so there's a lot of secure and responsible AI kind of guardrail and policy work that's needed. And all of that leads to what I think organizations are becoming more and more aware of is the need for an integrated strategy. And that strategy then has to translate to a really actionable plan across your organization. So, lots of complexity, like the value prop is super clear. The path to getting there can be a little challenging. So, we like to say adopting Gen AI is kind of like a multi-dimensional Rubik's Cube. Lots of complexity. You've got to figure out the patterns and you've got to kind of do them in the right order, which requires a really integrated approach. And that starts with first just developing a clear mental model of what's required to successfully adopt and scale Gen AI. Two, you need to understand what good looks like and across each of the dimensions. So when someone talks about Gen AI ready data, if they talk about knowledge graphs, if they talk about hyper personalization, what does that look like? What does good look like? What does it enable? And in what order should you be kind of taking on each of those different types of capabilities? Third, you need to understand what your current state looks like. Oftentimes, there's some foundational work that needs to be done, both from a kind of foundational security and responsible secure AI and responsible AI perspective. But every organization has a bunch of data work that needs to be done. Often, times orchestration, talent. There's lots of kind of foundational work that's required to be successful with this. You need to understand, A, what the pieces are. B, what good looks like. What does target state look like? C, where are you ready? Where you're not. Then you need to be able to, close the gap. And what we're recommending and what we're seeing work across, industries, across geographies, is there are some scaling blueprints that are beginning to emerge and get codified a little bit in terms of, hey, what's the fastest, lowest risk approach to going from A to B? And finally, you have to commit to action. This is no different from any transformational technology we've seen before it, whether that's the move to web commerce, whether it's the move to mobile, path to cloud. In each case, there was a fair amount of technical complexity. There was a lot of change management that was required. There were people implications. There were security and price implications. But most importantly, you had to really commit to making that journey. So that's what we're seeing, folks, in organizations today, is either in the early stage of kicking the tires on this, where they're just beginning to explore, or they're actively experimenting, working to kind of crack the code, and that's really where we're looking to engage and help organizations accelerate their journey. So first, start by understanding what the different capabilities required to adopt and scale Gen AI are. That's what led us to develop what we call the keys to winning. And when we kind of dig into our readiness framework or our Gen AI operating system in a second, you'll see how the different pieces fit together. But at a very high level, it starts with a really clear vision for the role that Gen AI can and should play in your business. That may be about driving revenue. It may be exclusively around workforce productivity, but you need to be clear about the role that you're expecting it to play. And then you need to drive, a lot of focus to solve for that or to turn that vision into reality in your business. Two, we touched on it. Integrate strategy and plans are not a joke in the Gen AI space because there's so many moving parts and there are a lot of interdependencies. And the unfortunate reality is you have to often solve for four or five or even six or seven things before you start to see value from Gen AI. So, if you solve for each of those one at a time as you understand them and as you figure each one out, it can be a very, very long journey. So having an integrated strategy and then a plan that helps you accelerate your path to value, super critical. Three, this is what everyone focuses on, right? We want to be able to turn great ideas into high performing generative solutions as quickly as possible and obviously do it responsibly and securely at a price point that makes sense for your business. What companies quickly figure out, they always jump to the productization stage, but what they learn very quickly is, wow, there are a lot of capabilities underneath the surface that need to be solved. Now we'll go into those different capabilities in just a moment, but one of the things that we often talk about is if you want high performing solutions, you got to have the right foundation to scale them upon. And last but not least, you really need to have good insights and actionable kind of recommendations, or you need to be able to take lots and lots of data and turn that into something that leadership and your teams can take action in virtually real time. And this is more important in the AI and Gen AI space than it's ever been. So this is kind of your what we like to think of as your high level mental model for how you adopt and scale Gen AI. So do we have a clear vision? Is everybody bought into it? Everyone on the same page? We're all rowing in the same direction. Do you have a strategy to win that helps you solve all the different pieces in the right order? Also, are you going to get there faster than your competitors? Because there is a bit of a race on these days. Organizations that unlock this faster than their competitors are going to have a really distinct competitive advantage. Third, products, that's the cool stuff. Can you take a great idea, prototype it, test it, and then quickly scale the solutions that are really impactful for your business? Do you have the capabilities in the right order, at the right level of maturity to do this repeatably? And can you manage this well with integrated insights? All right, so we'll take a look. Now we've got the high level mental model. When we drill down one level to what does good really look like? From a vision perspective, you want to start by making sure that your leadership teams and your team members in general really understand the case for Gen AI, is use cases, where it's working well, where it's not, how to leverage this and how to scale it safely and responsibly, and then what an adoption journey is likely to look like. And that looks a little different at the executive level, to the kind of team leadership level, to the team member level. So there's some demystifying kind of executive work all the way down to foundational Gen AI literacy that's really, really important. Next stage is making specific decisions about Gen AI's role in your business. I touched on it a little bit earlier, but let me add a little bit of color to why this is so important. Gen AI can do a lot of different things, right? But it's pretty complex, and it has a lot of kind of interdependencies that you have to work through. Today, a lot of organizations are just trying everything, kind of throwing it at the wall and see what sticks kind of approach. And the real challenge is they have a very small number of folks who really know how to build these solutions. And we see organizations with hundreds of POCs in progress and a handful of folks that are able to really deliver them. And it just causes lots of noise, and we end up seeing very little kind of throughput or flow. So being specific about some decisions on the front end and then being committed to maintaining that focus is really a key to winning. Next, you need to be able to articulate a clear and compelling vision. And, this is something that people skip a lot. And we almost always, with our clients, end up going back upstream and fixing this if people didn't focus on it enough. You end up with either kind of bumper sticker Gen AI that says, Gen AI for everyone, great, or you end up with these just very kind of corporate speak solutions that don't really kind of drive alignment and drive focus and clarity. So spending a little bit of time to get very clear around what your intent is and how you kind of get everybody aligned around it across the business, also very, very important. Next step, look, everyone's looking. Like the spotlight is bright around Gen AI in 2026. So you need to be able to not only articulate your vision, but engage and energize your stakeholders at the board level, at your, across your teams. You need to be able to engage your customers if this is customer facing. You need to engage partners if they play a key role in this journey. And for public companies, you need to be able to articulate this story to investors in a way that gives them confidence that you're on the right track and have the right approach. And last but not least, this isn't your traditional set it and forget it, like 5 to 8 year, 10-year vision. Gen AI is moving so fast that if asked us a year ago, if we had a conversation at the beginning of 2025, we would have had one vision for Gen AI that looked probably very small ball and kind of service focused with this kind of emerging thing called Gen AI agents or AI agents. Today, that vision looks completely different, like where agents are really going to be the prominent driver of transformational impact. So this stuff really is evolving so quickly that you need to be able to have a fairly dynamic vision and be reviewing it at least yearly. What we recommend is you have a light review quarterly and have some triggers where if some major innovation happens, you can evolve your vision and get everyone realigned really quickly. But at a minimum, you need to be looking at it annually. Then you move to strategy. And this is the area I would say where there's the most confusion across our clients. I think a lot of organizations think their strategy, that think they have a clear Gen AI strategy. And when you talk to their team members, they're like, yeah, I don't know what we're doing. Right. So, a lot of organizations today, I think, have, primarily bottoms up driven strategies where they're doing hackathons and they're looking at lots of ideas, or they have vendor driven strategies where they've got third parties coming in and telling them what, hey, you should be using Amazon and you should be using Bedrock and you should be using Claude versus OpenAI, or you should be, leveraging open source LLMs. That's not really a strategy. At the end of the day, you need to have a clear strategic intent that takes your vision and maps it to how it's going to be meaningful for your business. So that starts with a clear 12 to 18 month strategic intent, frames that out into clear work streams across your business that you can actually execute against. You need to be clear what you need to solve in each area. So for our clients, there's almost always a secure AI and responsible AI kind of governance work stream. There's a productization work stream. There's a talent work stream. And there's kind of business management and orchestration around this. But at the end of the day, you've got to be able to mobilize around this effectively. Next, we talked about prioritization at a very high level with Gen AI in your business. When you translate that to an actionable strategy, that needs to get far more specific. So first, what quick wins can we deliver? How do we provide people clear reasons to believe that this is the right path forward for the business, and then deliver clear increments of value every month, every 2 weeks, or we aspire actually to deliver a piece of meaningful value for our customers really every week, right? Because you want to build and sustain momentum. You want people excited about this. Two, you have to prioritize really ruthlessly. around this stuff because there's so many opportunities, there's so many different areas that this could be impactful that it turns into an anti-pattern. We end up with a classic whip problem often. So taking a look at what your actual capacity is. All right, you still have to deliver the business. You have lots of other initiatives, but what are the n number of high priority initiatives that are really key for us winning in this space? Third, you've got to prioritize specific outcomes. And early on, some of those outcomes may just be foundational. It may be enabling your engineers, right? It certainly is around security. It's often about like understanding, how we could orchestrate this at scale. But being clear around what your outcomes are at every stage of your journey drives lots and lots of alignment. All right, next, let's talk about how we take that intent and your priorities and turn them into results. So we spend a lot of time with our customers around structured acceleration planning. And we use the term acceleration plans versus roadmaps very specifically because if you solve generative AI problems kind of serially, one at a time, it's a very, very long time lead time to value. So our goal is to take some structured scaling blueprints, deliver value on a frequent basis. So you're contributing, and people see very clearly what this stuff can do, while you're methodically solving for the underlying capability challenges. And last but not least, this adaptive strategy. We touched on it with vision. This is far more the case with strategy. Strategy will be very dynamic on a quarter by quarter basis. So many of us who have embraced an agile world over the years have been involved with PI planning and big room planning and just in general that move towards adaptive strategy. And with AI and GenAI, like this is no joke. Like you have to embrace this. It puts the pace of innovation places a real premium on strategic adaptability in your organization. All right, next we'll look at products. So the first anti-pattern we see in the product space shouldn't be a big surprise for folks is we're starting to see a lot of organizations kind of falling in love with the tech, right? And jumping into, gee, what could this do? And sometimes losing a little line of sight into what customer problem they're actually solving. So in good agile fashion, we always start with the customer-centric lens around what value can we deliver, what jobs to be done, can we help our clients deliver in a new and better way as a result of GenAI. Second, for folks who've been exposed to some of the strategizer work, we love the model of kind of testing and systematically de-risking innovation and then scaling it as quickly as possible when we have the right solution. So, the reality is some of the best time you'll ever spend is time not developing a solution you're not ready for. So in the validating high potential Gen AI space, making sure you're really clear around technical feasibility testing and solution market fit, as lightly as possible while still being rigorous is the key. Next, this is where most of the work happens, is developing and supporting Gen AI solutions. We'll click into this at some level. We'll probably have an additional webinar that drills into the specifics here because there's a lot going on, right? There's data, there's model selection, there's natural language understanding, there's routing, which includes routing tools and agents, there's search and retrieval, there's response generation, which is what your customers see. There's secure and responsible AI at the product level. There are pricing and packaging considerations. And finally, there's a whole discussion around how do we support these solutions effectively. And ideally, that's wrapped with really good diagnostics, product diagnostics, and evaluation-driven development practices that take a measurement approach first to help you understand where your solutions are performing well, more importantly, where they're not, why, and what you need to do about it. And then once you create these awesome solutions that people love, you gotta get the word out. All right. So how do you accelerate adoption? And this is very typically kind of your traditional go-to-market action, but with new generative technologies, getting marketing, sales, customer support, customer success, legal, finance, and accounting all on the same page about these solutions is more important than ever. And last but not least, if you do this well and have really good data around how your systems are performing, how your go-to-market is, what feedback they're getting, what type of experience your customers are having, and then at a solution level, what's working and what's not, then you can have real data-driven roadmap discussions. Do I release the next feature to accelerate growth? Do we solve a customer experience challenge where maybe we have too much latency with a solution? Do we value engineer because the solution's a little expensive and the economics aren't quite right? Making those trade-offs is much easier in a data-driven world as long as you configure your telemetry appropriately. All right, capabilities. This is where a lot of the foundational work takes place. And again, there's a fair amount of detail below this, but I'll touch on it lightly. In the governance and operational integrity space, you've got secure AI, responsible AI, change management, and integrated governance. And all of those are absolutely critical. They're non-negotiable, to be fair. And a lot of organizations still have a ways to go to really crack the code in this space, which in extreme cases exposes them to some avoidable risk. So we always start there. Two, the foundational capabilities of data and how do we make sure everyone's selecting the right models and orchestration. There's a focus on UX design because the experience that you're delivering with these solutions is also absolutely critical. There's a couple other evaluation-driven development at an organizational level and GenAI ops all fall into that kind of foundational capability level. Three, implementing scaling capabilities are all about how do we orchestrate this? How do we take care of our people in the process? So there's kind of four areas of focus there. There's talent, both from an enabling your internal talent, but also how do we recruit talent? How do we make sure, how do we retain talent once we do train them? How do we think about our culture and make sure that we're safeguarding the aspects of our culture that are critical for our success? And ultimately, what do we need to think about in terms of multi-year strategic workforce planning? Those are all things that are relevant in a Gen AI enabled workforce. Two, you then get into a center of enablement or an accelerator. We like to call them Gen AI accelerators. How do we orchestrate, to use a term maybe a little at different levels, but how do we orchestrate the journey across the organization, identify best practices, share them? This is a community of practice on steroids in lots of ways. There's also some brand building if you're going to be customer facing, and there's also a focus on product economics because this stuff can get a little expensive, actually fairly quickly if you're not really being very deliberate about how you approach it. And last, there's a bunch of advanced capabilities, whether it's connecting Gen AI with AI and ML capabilities. Agents are in the advanced AI space, although they're getting more and more core to what we're doing. Then things like hyper-personalization, where you can really bring one-to-one marketing visions to life. And knowledge graphs are a critical part of this. We won't go into too much detail there. But as you work up the learning curve and you're looking to accelerate your impact even further, the advanced capabilities are really critical. And last but not least, look, it's really important to understand what's working and what's not. We like to joke, you can now automate and scale a truly awful customer experience faster and more effective, more efficiently than ever before. So as you work to adopt and scale Gen AI, you need to be really clear about its role. Is it moving the needle from a core business's perspective? I use the term KPIs. I think core business measures is probably actually a more accurate way to refer to it. So are we making more money? Is this translating into better margins? Are our customers, happy about this? Or are they receiving a great experience? Are they getting stickier? And what are the implications for our workforce as we go through this? Then you dig into customer insights and product insights. We use OKRs as a measure of how well you're executing your Gen AI strategy. KRIs for risks. The most important thing, do you understand where your risks are in this model? Are you covered? And where issues start to emerge, can you identify them and close them quickly? Then we've got a bunch of readiness and kind of lower level diagnostics. But the key takeaway here is as you move to semi-autonomous and eventually autonomous action, the implications of integrated insights become more and more important. And then being able to translate those to automated alerts and automated recommendation engines also gets really, really important because as you're moving faster, your ability or the importance to respond to that quickly gets more and more important. So spoke at you guys a lot. Now I want to get to like, how do you start the journey? Like, okay, lots of stuff, maybe a fair amount of complexity. Let's turn that into an easy approach to understanding where you are today and what you should do about it. So at each level of the keys to winning, we've partnered with Comparative Agility to produce a set of surveys or scans and a set of detailed assessments. The good thing is the scans are all free and the high-level assessments are as well. And there's a bunch of resources behind them. We're primarily passionate about enabling Gen AI adoption. And so there's a lot of resources we want to share with folks in the market and then kind of get everybody engaged on the journey. So the single vision survey takes about 5 minutes. Detailed vision assessment. Same thing with strategy. The survey is really short. I'd actually recommend that you take the full assessment because it's only 12 questions. It's really quick and it's very informative. When you get into product, that's where you get into lots of specificity, is what I would refer to it as. So there's a high-level product survey, very quick. Detailed product assessment, it's a lot of detail, but there's a lot to solve for here. And then as you kind of work up the Gen AI product learning curve, we've got an assessment when you're ready for the next step. So start with data or start with natural language understanding. Once you have a pretty good handle on that, move to routing or move to response generation. The idea here is in 5 minutes, you should be able to understand the high level, have a clear mental model. And then in an hour, you should understand each detailed area of focus and know what to do about it. Same thing's true at the capability level. Here we've got one high level assessment. It's pretty, I think it's very effective. One high level survey, it may be a little too high level for folks. So I kind of recommend that you go directly to the assessment. And here's where there's an assessment and a set of acceleration guides for each organizational capability that allows you to understand where you are today, what good looks like, how do you compare to the international benchmark, and then what do you need to do about it. And last but not least, simple survey, and then a full assessment for folks who want to really dig into insights and what they need to do. I touched on acceleration guides. This is a really important part of what we offer. And it was a little bit of a passion project, to be honest, last year. So for each survey and assessment, every question represents a competency. We have almost 900 competencies across our Gen AI operating system. For every one of those competencies, once you complete the full assessment, you can click on the recommendations and it'll take you to a dedicated web page that will give you a high-level description of the competency, why it's important, why it's challenging at scale, how complex is it to solve. Some of this stuff is easier than others. And more importantly, based on your level of readiness, it'll provide the recommendations of here are the first three things that you should do, right? And it'll give you links to resources, to workshops, and kind of recommendations of how to accelerate your journey. Next, some key watchouts as you work to accelerate your capabilities in this space. And then, probably most importantly, what are the benefits of getting this right? So today, once you complete one of the free assessments, you'll have access to these. And like I said, we have about 900, we have almost 900 web pages that represent over 5,000 pages of acceleration recommendations as part of our proprietary library. So this is something that I'd really recommend you explore in the platform. The goal is to go from baseline assessment to an action plan in minutes, literally. All right. So last but not least, we talked about committing. All right. So this is the important part. A lot of times people take assessments and they all get, together. They realize like they admire the problem. They, all acknowledge, yeah, boy, but we aren't good at that. And then with everybody with the best of intent, they'll often craft some plan of, hey, we should really go after that. And then the daily grind of work happens and it just never quite gets actioned. Right. So a key part of this process is, once you identify a gap, that needs to translate to a targeted gap closure plan. It needs to be owned, and it needs to be owned by a person. It can be owned by a team, but we really recommend, even when it's owned by a team, that there's clear accountability. So maybe it's either an individual or it's a team, but if it's teamed, it's really got to be owned collectively. It's got to be time bound. You have to have clear measures of success. So, here's where we are today. When we solve this problem, this is what it's going to look like, and here's how we would know that we move the needle. And you've got to build it into your team's backlog. So we always say, look, if there's a targeted gap closure plan, it's got to be in a backlog. It's got to get planned within 30 days, and I need to see it. I need to see momentum or action against it within at least 90 days. But if it's a key gap, you want to see action within 30 to 45 days. So look, this is all part of our brand promise, which is to help our clients deliver and realize twice the AI value in half the time.